Hi, I'm Sabrina Fernandez and I'm back with some content in English. The reality is that the entire world is going through a really hard time right now. Coronavirus presents a real-life threat for many people, especially those most vulnerable in terms of health conditions, but also those vulnerable for not having access to healthcare and state support. At this point, we're talking about lockdown everywhere, but how can the homeless go on lockdown? How can refugees report contagion and seek proper healthcare if by doing this they risk being sent to their countries of origin? And how can we fight the pandemic if a country's president keeps calling this a little flu that shouldn't get in the way of the economy? Yeah, I'm here to talk about Bolsonaro again, but beware because he's not the only one pushing this kind of thinking right now. The coronavirus pandemic has mobilized governments around the world to take action in order to minimize deaths and the strain the contagion has put on their healthcare systems. Social distancing, by which everyone who can stay at home stays at home, is a preferred method to prevent the curve of contagion from getting too high. Knowing this, governors from all Brazilian states are taking action. They're canceling classes and they're shutting down shopping malls and they're recommending home office for all non-essential services. This, of course, represents a risk of going home without pay for those Brazilians who work in formal jobs, which is about 40% of the jobs nowadays. Job security is not standard in Brazil, and for many workers, staying home means going hungry or risking getting evicted. This is why there are politicians in Congress here working on emergency projects for universal basic or at least universal emergency income. Civil society is pressuring big companies to let their workers go home with pay. Economists, even liberal economists, are asking for immediate new credit for public healthcare system, such as the public healthcare system in Brazil, SUS, and each day it becomes more obvious that the government spending ceiling has to be removed. It's time to spend to save people from dying and from terrible financial stress. In many places around the globe, we are now discussing the end of the austerity paradigm. Because if a pandemic like this one shows us something in terms of how the economy works, is that you can talk the free market talk all you want, but society is made up of humans, and the smashing majority of us are not billionaires, and we need all the security and welfare we can get, especially when things get rough like this. But unlike many national leaders, left and right, who are making some kind of effort, Bolsonaro in Brazil is taking the opposite direction. Even Trump, who could be taking this a lot more seriously, really, a lot more seriously, at least he's doing something. Bolsonaro, on the other hand, is only inspired by the worst of Trump's actions. In addition, he continues to be dismissive of the pandemic. Everyone suspects he contracted the virus after his last visit to the US, which becomes quite obvious when you see that over 20 people close to him got diagnosed with the coronavirus. Bolsonaro doesn't want to admit to it. It's very likely he got lucky to have the mild symptoms, which didn't stop him from going out in public during demonstration in his support. The thing is that he keeps using this to call the virus basically harmless and it's some silly little common flu. Recently, his economic team came up with some measures, but they were far from whopping it right now. They even tried to allow companies to temporarily dismiss workers without pay for 4 months and with no job guarantee upon returning. So we had to make a fuss about it, which is quite complicated today since we can't necessarily go out and protest. It's quite the opposite, really, because look at this. Bolsonaro went on TV and he accused the press of spreading panic for no reason. He criticized governors for closing schools because, according to him, if those at risk are over 60, why close children's schools? Yes, Brazil's president doesn't understand that people over 60 share a life with children too. That children may not be at a huge risk here, but children can spread the virus if they catch it. The reality is that he doesn't care about facts at all. He may have gotten elected by Brazilian people, but he got elected by capitalists too. And he intervened along the way. Big business owners, they are now complaining that the pandemic is causing them to profit less and they just want to keep their burger restaurants open during the pandemic. They're part of his base. After all, there's a lot more to lose than 5,000 or 7,000 people dying, said the billionaire. And truth is, it can be many more people if we do nothing, but they don't care. It's all about profits as usual. So if it was up only to the president, we'd all be roaming around the cities right now and ignoring the risks presented by the virus. This means that right now, look how weird it is, actually staying home is disobeying the president. So as of right now, political representatives from different ideological camps, they have gone forward to ask for Bolsonaro's impeachment. It's quite clear that his actions fit the criteria for crimes of responsibility. There are many actions, in fact, and this could get him impeached. But so did Temer's a while back, and he didn't get impeached. And Dilma did not commit any crime of responsibility, but got impeached anyway. So what I'm saying, it's a complicated tool, especially when presidents can buy out Congress if they want. But it's also worth the try, especially when presidents are trying to intimidate Congress as well, as is the case of Bolsonaro. His authoritarian tendencies are showing more and more, and even his voters have expressed disappointment that Bolsonaro seems to govern for himself and his sons, not for Brazilian people. And as much as I like to do the whole "we warned you" bit, this is less important than creating the kind of social cohesion that we need right now to fight the pandemic and get Bolsonaro out, be it through impeachment or most of the country calling him to resign, or I don't know, French and Russian revolutions come to mind. This pandemic isn't so much creating difficult situations as it is exposing how capitalism and its managers, how they put us between a rock and a hard place all the time. There are telemarketing companies trying to squeeze as much surplus value from their workers' labor right now as possible. They're having them make absolutely unnecessary outgoing calls at this moment, putting them at so much risk that online accounts began gathering the cries for help to denounce what's going on. It's very clear that to most of the elites and the presidents that rule exclusively for those elites, a virus like this should not stop commodity circulation. It's always been about working till you die, right? And at the same time, the private healthcare industry continues to show its face as the greedy devils that they are. If they can profit from the pandemic with new patents and expensive treatments, they're in. If they can't profit, they'll ask the state to bail them out, as they always do. We're living in a crucial moment in our world's history. We're fighting climate change and terrible inequality and pollution and mass incarceration and loads of personal debt, and we're fighting exclusionary healthcare systems precisely when we need public, universal, and free healthcare for everyone, independent of employment or national legal status. And this is a global problem. And for me, this only highlights the cruelty of US imposed sanctions still going on against Venezuela and Iran, for example, or even the terrible reality of the world's largest open-air prison, Gaza, whose ability to handle the pandemic is limited by the economic blockade, among other reasons. If you're worried about the pandemic and if you're in a place where your political leadership cares, please join solidarity with those of us who live under very inadequate leadership, to say the least, and in fact, cruel and greedy leadership, to be quite honest. It's time to empower public healthcare once and for all. It's time to come to the aid of working people and small business owners, not the big corporations. These are the people who create value, who add to their communities, who make it all happen. It's time to establish that housing is a human right and no one should be evicted for lack of payment at a moment like this. It's time to secure water and sanitation services, because how are people supposed to wash their hands when access to water is limited or non-existent in many favelas? And it's also time to emphasize that no person is illegal and to give as much support as possible to refugees and the homeless who can't just make a choice as simple as to stay home, right? Which home? I hope we can learn something from this crisis, and I hope we learn it before it's too late.